next speaker is going to expand upon our subject a little more, and it's Mr. Ran Amitai, who is currently a PhD student at the Department of Asian Studies at the University of Haifa in Israel. And he is researching on modern India, and his research focuses on the history of the Jews in British-ruled and contemporary India. His PhD subject is the integration of Indian Jews into the British Indian Army and the Independent Indian Army, titled The Military Service as a Career for the Jews in India during the British and Post-Independence India from 1750 to 1970. Before I hand over to Mr. Amitai, I just very briefly like to mention that I was invited by General Jacob to give a talk at the Delhi synagogue on the Battle of Haifa, and which was a very, very interesting experience, because I'd actually done the regimental history for 61 Cavalry, which was the successor regiment to the princely state armies that constituted the military elements that took part in Haifa. Mr. Amitai, over to you now.
Yes. Okay. Is my presentation yes. You see my presentation?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very good. Okay. Well, I'll just say a few words about my research. My research is, as Rana China said, it's about the Jews in the British and the post-independence Indian Army. But now in this lecture, I will focus on one of the chapters, which is the Jews in the Indian Army after the independence. Here there's a few photos. On the right one is Vice Admiral Benjamin Sampson with Jawaharlal Nehru. 1 second. Okay. Okay. Now some general background about the communities. As you heard before, there were 3 communities. The Cochini Jews from Kerala, they spoke Malayalam. The Bene Israel, who spoke Marathi, and the Baghdadi. General number, the Cochini Jews were at their peak time about 3,500 people. The Bene Israel, which were the biggest, were more than 20,000. And the Baghdadis were like 7,000 to 8,000. That was about 1947 to 1950. I would just want to mention that among the Cochini Jews, there were actually 2 separate groups. One was called the Mulberry Jews, or the Black Jews. That was the ancient community. And another one, it was the Pardesi Jews, or the White Jews. This is a community of people who came from the Middle East and from Europe after the excitement of the Jews from Spain since the late 15th and early 16th century. However, there was living also in Cochin and spoke Marathi. This is generally the map. You can see that was the area of the Bnei Israel, Cochinis and Baghdadis, which were mainly in Bombay and Kolkata. The Bnei Israel and the Cochini Jew, the ancient, more than 2,000 years, but because they didn't leave any written document, it's hard to be precise. There is some other evidence that says that they've been more than 2,000 years. The Baghdadis are much later. They came since the middle and late 18th century, and their history is traced back and well documented. Now, as we heard before, the people of Bnei Israel were warriors for a very long time. Even before the British arrived to India, they fought in the armies of the Mughals and the Marathis, and also the Jews of Cochin fought with the Raja of Cochin in his army against the Portuguese. Later, when the British came, the Bnei Israel were among the earliest to join the British Indian Army, and they continued to fight with the British during all the 19th century. I will just mention a few wars that Israel fought with the British. The Anglo-Maratha War, early 19th century. The Sindh campaign in the 1830, 1840. The Punjab campaign, 1840s. During the British mutiny, they fought with the British, Abyssinian expedition 1867-1868, later the Anglo-Afghan War, the Burmese War, and so on. By the end of the 19th century into the beginning of the 20th century, there was suddenly sharp decrease in the enlistment of the Bene Israel into the army. I discussed it in another chapter of my research, was the reforms that the British carry in the recruitment for the army after the mutiny in 1857, in 1858. Because of that, the number was decreased from like 200-300 at least by the 1890s to about 30 maximum in 1905. However, this decrease was for a temporary time, and then by World War First and Second, and then late in the 1930s and into World War Second, the number increased again. As someone, the brigadier told before that there were about 175 Jews in World War First. My research, I claim there were much more, like a few hundred in World War Second, maybe even almost like 1,000. And that in World War Second, it was including also Baghdadi Jews. Many of them from Calcutta went to the Burma campaign to defend their home. As we know, the Japanese front was less than 1,000 kilometers from Kolkata. And anyway, this trend of enlistment into the army continue also at the post-independence time, and this time not only for the army, but also to the Indian Navy and Indian Air Force. After the independence, all the consideration of the British about the recruitment was useless anymore. And this time it was not the British Indian Army, but Indian Army and the Pakistan Army. And then it was good for the Jews. It was good to get promoted in the army, as I will explain. Now, in India, yeah, the army was inherited from the British, but there was not anymore this consideration of the British. So the Jews could, like many other minorities and all the communities could get into high rank. In the independence of India in 1947 and then the independence of Israel led to a few changes. First of all, as we said, the Indian army was already Indian army, not the British army. Second, the Jewish community itself went under a change because there began a mass exodus from India into Israel and the Western countries. And the small community were in India did not want to get lost, so they somehow managed to be as one community, like just Indian Jew. Doesn't matter if you are Cochini or Baghdadi or Bene Israel. And another issue, it was the reason for that was partly the exodus. The Baghdadis went mostly to the Anglo-Saxon world, like England, Canada, and Australia, where the Bene Israel and the Cochinis went mostly to Israel. Now I will discuss a few issues about the Indian army and the identity. And it will be actually from 1947 to 1999, Kargil War, and not up to 1971. I will then say about this issue. First, the of the soldier. Did they call themselves Jewish or Indian? Second, the position of the state of Israel within the identity of the Jews. They were Indian, but what happened about the state of Israel? And the third, it's their status and how they got a promotion. Now, before we discuss it, I just want to say a few words about three figures that pass away. The first one, of course, is everybody said already. The left photo is the famous from 1971. The right photo, it's the General Jacob dedicate me his 2 books when I visit him in 2012. This is actually the second book, Odyssey and Peace and War. I'll just say a few words. When I started my research, I couldn't find Jacob books at all in any library in Israel. So when I came to India, I bought 1 book and I asked if he can sign me the book. Finally, when I came, he gave me also his second book. And there is some other story, but I will leave it for now. The other 2 figures, it's Lieutenant Colonel Joseph Ephraim Jihad from the Garwal Rifle. He born in 1923 to Bene Israel family in Bombay. 1943, he joined the army into the 2nd Battalion of Garwal Rifle. He fought in the Burma campaign and then in the Indo-Pakistan War of 1947-1948. At the war of 1965, he was the commander of the 8th Garwali Battalion and was killed in action in Punjab in 16 of September 1965. He was buried in Delhi Jewish cemetery, and that's his grave. The third one, we also told about him, it was Flight Lieutenant Lloyd Sassoon from the Indian Air Force, who, while he was in a mission in the 1970 war, he was shot down in Punjab of December 1971. He managed to eject himself, but was probably lynched on the ground by the Pakistani mob. And after the war, he was declared as a missing in action. He survived by a widow and 2 sons. His widow, she's also well known in the local Indian Bene Israel community. Now to the subject I said before. The identity of the soldier, Jews or Indian. Because they were small in number, they had to recalibrate their identity, and in general, they call themselves, we are an Indian. When I interview a few of the veterans, all of them told me, we are Indian. We are Jews, but we are Indians. They were proud about it. And I just say again that the number of the Jewish soldiers in the Indian army was small, but it was high compared to the proportion in the Jewish population, and compare also to the number to Jews in other Western armies in the world. Period to independence, the Jews were also posted in Pakistan. After the independence, they had to choose to be in India or Pakistan. None of them chose to remain in Pakistan. Here we have a few examples. Lieutenant, later he was David Avram from the Ordnance Corps, was posted in Quetta in Pakistan before the independence. After the independence, he moved to Bombay to assist and carry for refugees. Colonel George Benjamin from the Engineer Corps, who was a native of Karachi, switched to the Indian Army. Captain, later he was Lieutenant Colonel Morris Cohen from the Baghdadi community. From Bombay, he was in the Corps of Signal, and he took part in the First Kashmir War in 1947-1949 as a commander of a signal unit. Later, he wrote his memories on this book, Thunder Over Kashmir. I will just say this is the new copy of the book. The original copy, it was in very small print, in very small number. It's very, very hard to find it. The Lieutenant Colonel Cohen passed away. He moved to England where he passed away in 1995. But when I visited in England, I met his widow and his 2 sons that gave me the book. And last, Lieutenant Colonel Ephraim Jihad also fought in this war. Okay, this I already said about that. Now I will touch a little bit about the religious affair of the Jews. As some of you know, certainly the Jews have some custom and traditions that we have to try to keep them. In the army, in the Western countries, there were a religious service for Jews, and in some armies, there were also a Jewish chaplain, the rabbi. In the Jewish brigade in World War II, it was determined that the Jews would be allowed to celebrate all the Jewish holidays, that the day of rest will be Shabbat, Saturday, instead of Sunday, as it's possible, and that the soldier will not serve with unclean meat like pork. In the Indian army, it was a little bit more complicated to keep this rule. But I asked some of the veterans about that. Now, the term of the Jewish identity and their tradition was unfamiliar in the Indian army, as the number of Jews was small and many soldiers even hear about the Jewish religion. But the army made an effort to let the Jewish military personnel get vacation during the Jewish Israel holidays. And that time they could go either home or to the nearby. For example, Lieutenant Colonel Morris Cohen said that when he was in Kashmir, he got vacation in October. It was the Jewish New Year, and he went to Bombay. At that time, it was also the Diwali. Now, the Hindu soldier couldn't get a holiday, but he got it on this time. Now, when it was a little bit, when it was probably a bit longer, so he could get to Bombay, but when the vacation was shorter, they traveled to the nearby big city where they had some Jewish communities that they could celebrate with them. Some of the officers and the soldiers were posted in the northeast, could go to Kolkata, where was the Baghdadi Jewish community. Others were posted in the Western Himalaya, could go to Delhi. In the south, they could go to Bombay or Pune. In central India, it was a small community in Jabalpur, Madhya Pradesh. The issue of keeping the kosher food, it's a little bit more complicated. In Indian army, it was almost impossible to maintain a kosher kitchen. But since a large part of the Hindus are pure veg, there was no problem with meat or mixing meat and dairy. And anyway, to eat pork meat, it's also very unfamiliar in the Indian army because it's provided for Muslims as well. And again, Morris Cohen in his book mentions that they had a short of meat and the soldiers thought to take a pony and slaughter and get the meat. Finally, they didn't have to. He said that if he had to do it, he was avoid from eating that. The attitude and the relation with Israel. This is an important issue. Although the Jews of India saw themselves as a proud Jew and the relation with Israel, and they like Israel, relation with the state of Israel was a little bit problematic. It was stood out especially in the military because the official attitude of the Indian government toward Israel during the 1950 to 1970 was quite hostile. India was in a very good relation with the Arabs country and also saw itself as a part of the leadership of the non-alignment countries, in which Egypt was a major part on this group. And Egypt, of course, was enemy of Israel. And the soldiers, they face two opposite tendencies. On one hand, the soldier gave them a great sympathy and admiration about Israel. But on the other hand, the policy of the Indian government was hostile, and there was no solution for this contradiction. I will just finish in minutes. It is interesting to note that when Nasser came to India as for the commit of the non-alignment countries, his host was no other than Admiral Benjamin Sampson. And also the pilot who took him from Pune to Delhi was a Jewish pilot. Now the Jews of India, they participate in activity with soldiers from countries which had no relation with Israel. Major George Judah and Brigadier Benson Daniels, the instructor soldier from Afghanistan. Major Reuben Abraham from Air Force, he was trained with a soldier from Iran after the post-revolutionary Iran. But this soldier even didn't know about the origin or that they were a Jew. The last thing is that the hostility prevent the Jewish people to get to Israel when they was in the army. They could go only after they finished the army, and that continue also after the diplomatic relations were established. So General Jacob, when he was in Israel, it was still after he retired from the army. When they retired, they could go to Israel. Wing Commander Isaac Avaskar left India in 1966, in 1970, and became a pilot in El Al. Commodore Jack Jeffett left India in 1966. He was from the Navy and came to Israel. Others choose to stay, to remain in India after their retirement. Brigadier David Avram went home to his hometown, home city, Jabalpur, where he was living after his retirement when his children came to Israel. Now, none of them that was in the Indian army continue in the IDF. Generally there was nobody. I will just continue. Now there's the advancement into the post-independence. In India, the independence army, they could get promotion, and you know, the Jews, that they were excel in their abilities, could go to the highest rank. I'll just give you here a few examples. 1950s. Vice Admiral Benjamin Sampson, who was the first military touch in London. Lieutenant Colonel and later Major Jonathan Sampson was the superintendent of the development of ammunition in the army. Captain Ellis Girard was the chief judge or chief advocate of the Indian Navy. Later in the 1960s, Lieutenant General Russell Mordechai, which already we told about him here. Brigadier Benson Daniels, Colonel Oliver Chaim, who was in the ordnance forces, and Colonel Reuben Jacob, who was joined the artillery in 1967. The reason for this enlistment was a community family model role. For example, the Brigadier Benson Daniels, he was from a family with a background in the army. His father was a major and post in Hyderabad, where he was born, and his two brothers were also officers in the army. Others, like Colonel Reuben Jacob, had an uncle who was in the signal force, Oliver Chaim, saw the General Jacob as and Admiral Sampson as a model. There is no exact about the Jews in India in the independence time, but we roughly estimate that the number of officers was like a couple of thousand, 30 to 40, 50 in high ranks, and the total number of soldiers also in a lower rank of officer were like 200-300 people in a given time. That was from 1950 to about 1990s. Now, conclusion. I will not explain about all the process of the recruitment, but I'll just say again, before the independence, the Indian soldier could not get promotion beyond the rank of and the duty of a platoon commander or company staff. The reason for that was that the British didn't want that Indian will command a British soldier. That was changed after the independence, and they could promote and get a high rank, and that was happened. And Yeah, and again, as I said, after the independence, there were like at least 20 to 30 Jews, which were in a rank of, or even more, in a rank of lieutenant colonel and above, and also a few pilot and people on some officer in the Indian Navy. Okay, I will just finish, and I just want to thank very much for Mr. Nissim Moses from the Bene Israel communities that he gave me his photo collection and helped me to contact many of the veterans. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that wonderful talk. It's been very, very informative, and I realize it's a very broad subject and very fascinating subject. And one can go on listening to it for a very long time. And obviously, when you've done so much research, it's difficult to condense it into a very, very short space of time. But thank you very much, Mr. Amitai. Before we move on to our final stage, before I throw the floor open to the House for the Q&A, I'd just like to inform everybody that His Excellency the Ambassador had another engagement, and he had to go for that, and he's extended his apologies. He can't be here for the end of the session. I have three speakers three members of the audience who would like to make some remarks. First of them is Mr. Tarun Vijay, who's a former member of parliament, and he has been actively involved in promoting Indo-Israel ties over the years. He's currently chairman of the National Monuments Authority, and he's also working on a research project with the USI on Indo-China, the civilizational connect. And in view of his long-standing association with Israel and his efforts to cement ties between our two countries, he'd like to say a few words on the subject. Mr. Tarun Vijay, sir, over to you. May I please request you to limit it to about 3 minutes, as we have a few other speakers and we're kind of running out of time. Thank you.
I pay my homage because General Jacob was a very dear friend, and when I was working in the RSS magazine, he would come many times and he would visit our office and share his views, which perhaps he won't be able to share elsewhere. I would like to begin with a very interesting email that he had sent me on August 7th, 2008, 12 years before. He sent the mail attaching some excerpts from his yet-to-be published book. And at the end of it, he said, Tarun, there is a tiny Jewish cemetery in Delhi. The time is approaching when I will one day, without any fanfare, be led to rest in a simple grave, known only to a few, his contributions unrecognized by government and consequently unknown to the people of his country. However, one day, and surely come, future historians will recognize my contribution. I'm so happy that today, on the eve of Republic Day, we are remembering one of the greatest defenders of our republic. And that makes the general a great soldier, a great strategist, and a warm friend. Very much involved in counterinsurgency strategies, and his heart was in it. He wrote to me in an email and said that, look, Tarun, money and arms are being sold from outside, weapons and money from Pakistan, Bangladesh, and money from the Middle East. Explosives are readily available locally. And gelatin, also detonators, are in use in mining and road construction. Intelligence gathering, particularly grassroots, and assessment need to be drastically improved in order to keep up with a rapidly developing scenario. It is time that operations, anti-insurgency operations, should be designed to be proactive, not reactive. The national security setup should be revamped as had been done in the USA. So he was very much of the opinion that the Indian security system especially in the internal security matters and in our counterinsurgency operations, must be proactive. And the use of army and air force must be used. So there is something that still makes the thoughts and the persona and the life of General Jacob very, very relevant. He remains as an inspiration to us, and especially to the younger generation. Nobody thinks that which religion he belonged to. He belonged to the religion of India. He belonged to the people of India. He belonged to the tricolor. Thank you very much, and Jai Hind.
Thank you very much for sharing your very insightful views, Mr. Tarun Vijay. I now have Lieutenant General Arun Sani, a former Army commander and a member of the USI Council. General Sani has had a very long-standing association as well with General Jacob, and he would like to say a few words in his honor on this occasion. Once again, General, may I please request you to limit your remarks to about maximum 3 minutes, please. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Coordinator China, and it's been absolutely fascinating listening to everyone recounting aspects of the General's life in service and otherwise. I thought I must say a few words only for two reasons. One is I saw him as a youngster when I was in school, when he was visiting Devlali, and I think my father was also a gunner. I myself am a gunner, so they get a chance to interact with him then. But more importantly, when I was ADC to General O.P. Malhotra as the chief, when he was the Chief of Army Staff, General Jacob had just retired, and the large number of interactions that used to happen unofficially, socially at the General's place, I did get the opportunity to interact with him and pick up a lot of stuff, knowledge and interest that he had. I want to recount two incidents, and I'll then end. One, of course, was the fact that just when he passed away, I was humbled to have been the senior colonel commandant of the Regiment of Artillery, and I was there for the final ceremonies when he was laid to rest in the cemetery just behind Khan Market. And I have to compliment the Jewish embassy here, the ambassador. Then they took over the complete ceremony as far as the last bit of religious rites were concerned. So it was a privilege that one of the last functions that I did as the senior colonel commandant of the Regiment of Artillery in Jan 2016 when I retired was to be there when this great soldier finally left the heaven for his heavenly abode. But the interesting incident I want to give is that I received him in Moscow when he was nominated to go and attend the victory in Japan celebrations in the Soviet Union. I used to be the assistant military attaché. I looked after him for 3 days, and that's the time he made me visit all the art galleries that exist, and there is tremendous amount of artwork that exists in Moscow, and I think maybe that was one of the best learning experiences for me, for a young half colonel, to suddenly look at all these paintings and then hear about the historical and the artful analysis given about each of the paintings. So as I said, he was a very versatile manner, whether it was a band concert, whether it was art, and this museum, which was his house, which had everything, which dated any time from 17th, that is about 18th century to about late 19th, early 20th century. And that's what his house was. It was like a museum. And there, when I took him, and this is where I say how respect for him was there, I saw him off at the airport from Moscow to go off to Vladivostok for the celebrations. Lo and behold, 14 hours later, when the flight landed as per the time chain, I suddenly get a call from the Consul General in Vladivostok that the general hasn't arrived. And I had seen him off in the aircraft. The aircraft doors had closed. It was just moving off from the runway when I left the airport. And so there was tremendous amount of strife that was created. His baggage arrived, but the general did not arrive. And the story came out, and this is where I said I must recount it. When he got into the aircraft, the Russians got to know that there is a Jewish general from India who was going to attend the celebrations. They were a little hurt that they could not give him the front seat to sit in the aircraft. So the pilot turned the aircraft back to the airport. They put him on the next flight so that he had the full front row available to him. They said, because if the general is coming to attend with his great And as I said, everybody knew about his historical capability, the amount of activities that he had done. So he was put on a new aircraft, which was flown in specifically from there to Vladivostok to honor him and get him to that place. But I can assure you that for a half colonel, when the general did not arrive, I think I did get a lot of flack from a lot of people. They said, you really didn't do your job well, till I, of course, got to know what the reasons were. But I'll end with that, just to say that an absolutely fine man whom I saw the first time at the age of 8 years, and then in my 60th year, I had the humble privilege of being there when he finally left for his heavenly abode. Thank you very much, Squadron Leader China, and great to hear all these speakers. My battery captain, Brigadier Apte, when I joined the regiment, he's there, and I think he recounted those stories so beautifully. Thank you, sir. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Arun. Very kind of you.
Thank you, General. Fascinating reminiscences. We have time just for one more. Professor Reuben Yosef has requested that he'd just like to very briefly share some of his thoughts. Over to you, sir.
Good evening. Thank you very much. I thank Professor Brigadier.
Your mic is on mute, sir. Can you say something, Professor?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Thank you. Good afternoon to everyone. I apologize for butting in, but I was invited by by Brigadier Jatapte. We are old schoolmates. I'm slightly junior to him, and we both studied at the Shivaji Military High School in Pune. I graduated from that school in '73, and actually, General Jacobs' great aunt was married to my great grandfather. So our family, actually, we had intermarriages between the Cochini Jews and the Bene Israel, and that's why also General Mordechai, who's a cousin of my father, General Jacobs, who's the father. And I remember General Jacobs visiting us when my father was Wing Commander Joe Joseph. He's buried in Maskeret Batia in Israel now after his retirement. And when he was posted in Jorat, I remember General Sampson, I remember General Jacobs visiting us at home. And actually, when I finished school, and I was told by the NDA in Pune, Karakwasla, that I was too young to join, I spoke to General Jacobs and he said, well, why don't you go to Israel? And then the irony of it was that when I was in my JCO's course in the Israeli as a paratrooper, I joined the Israeli army as a paratrooper in the 202nd Brigade. And the CNC came to visit us, and who would it be but Motagur, General Gur. And when he came to know that I was an Indian Jew, he asked me whether I knew General Jacobs. It turns out that the two of them were friends. And so for me, it was sort of closing a circle wherein in India, I consult with General Jacobs, and in Israel, in the army, I'm asked whether I know about General Jacobs. So for me, that was a very, very intimate thing. I'm sorry to say I did not meet General Jacobs after I left India in '74, but he kept in contact with my dad. I have quite a few letters from him, from Air Chief Marshal Suri, who was his postmate. So for me, General Jacobs is an idol. And yes, we are all Jews, we are the Bene Israel, but we are also Indians. And I would like to end by saying that whenever I'm asked where I'm from, I say my motherland is India, my fatherland is Israel. Thank you all for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor. It's very kind of you. And I would now, before I close the session, I'd like to hand over to Mr. Snehit Borgum, who's director of the Indian Cultural Center at Tel Aviv, and for delivering the vote of thanks. Over to you, Mr. Borgum.
I would like to now extend my vote of thanks to all the participants of this webinar. Special thanks to Ambassador Sanjeev Singla, for sparing his time and also for being the motivating force behind this idea of hosting a webinar on the legacy of Jewish soldiers of the Indian Army, Director of USI, Major General B.K. Sharma, for making this event possible. Without you, sir, and without your help, wouldn't have been a reality. And Brigadier Ajit Apte for his detailed and valuable insights on the life of Lieutenant General JFR Jacob, who will continue to inspire the generations to come. And special thanks to Mr. Rana Mitai for sharing his research findings on the history and legacy of Jewish soldiers of the Indian Army. And we look forward to the publication of your full findings. And I would like to extend my special thanks to Group Captain K. Sundarmani, our defense attaché at in Tel Aviv, Israel, and Brigadier Mohit Chauhan. They were very instrumental in finalizing the concept of the webinar and also for helping us with getting in touch with the USI. And as we continue to speak, Lieutenant General Sarje Mordecai is also among the attendees. Thank you, sir. Thank you for taking your time and attending the event. And also we would like to extend our thanks to Tarun Vijay ji, Chairman, National Monuments Authority. We would like to see you back here in Israel very soon. And my special thanks to Squadron Leader China, because I have been troubling him with many requests, short notices, and he's been very kind enough to accommodate them all. Thank you very much for attending this.